According to the oldest traditions, when this creature claims a victim, it does not devour the body the way a normal predator would. It leaves the torso intact. It ignores the vital organs. Instead, it takes only very specific, deeply disturbing pieces. It takes the 2 little fingers. It takes the 2 little toes. And finally, it tears away the earlobes and the nostrils. This surgical precision isn't about hunger. In the local belief systems, consuming these exact physical features strips the victim of their individual identity, effectively destroying their human soul. And that single detail changes everything. We are not dealing with a simple wild animal. But here is the mystery that remains unanswered. Why did British officials, early 20th century journalists, and modern biologists all report encountering this exact same nightmare in the flesh? To understand what is truly hunting in the deep wetlands of Africa, we have to look past the myth and uncover a truth that science has tried to bury for decades. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part is the treacherous environment where this entity operates. In the Kasempa district of northern Zambia, there is a sprawling, dangerous wetland known as the Jiundu Swamp. Historically, this dark, isolated, and nearly impenetrable region was a haven for thieves, murderers, and outlaws who wanted to disappear from society. But the hardened criminals hiding in the marsh were absolutely terrified of something much worse than the law. The local Konde and Bemba peoples have a specific name for it. They call it the Kongamato. When translated, this word means the breaker of boats, or the overturner of boats. However, the legend becomes even more mysterious when you look at its hunting methods. Unlike most flying predators that dive from the sky to strike their prey, the Kongamato is described as a river shutter. It waits in the murky depths, directly downstream of shallow river crossings. When a fisherman or traveler attempts to paddle across the dark water, the entity uses a supernatural force to stop the river from flowing entirely. The water level suddenly begins to rise. Even if the terrified paddler furiously rows toward the shore, the canoe will abruptly come to a dead stop, as if it is smashed into an invisible wall. The tribesmen believe this happens because the Kongamato has seized the wooden hull of the boat from underneath the water, and then the boat is violently overturned. Very few people who see the Kongamato survive the encounter. But those who do live to tell the tale describe something that completely defies modern biology. What happened afterward changed the legend forever. The Western world finally caught a glimpse of the beast. The creature is described as having an immense wingspan stretching between 4 and 7 feet across. Some exaggerated reports even claim it stretches up to 100 feet, blotting out the setting sun as it glides silently over the swamps. But the most disturbing detail is its skin. It has no feathers. Its body is completely covered in smooth, leathery skin, or perhaps dark scales, usually described as a deep reddish, black, or brown. Its head features a long, sharply pointed beak. Yet one detail does to fit. Inside that beak is a terrifying row of sharp, jagged teeth. In 1923, a British explorer and magistrate named Frank H. Melland published a fascinating book titled In Witch-Bound Africa. Melland had spent over a decade living among the Konde tribe, earning their trust and documenting their deepest, darkest fears. Listening to their stories, he realized the locals were describing a flying reptile. To test his theory, Melland opened a scientific reference book and showed the tribesmen illustrations of various animals, including extinct prehistoric dinosaurs. Without any prompting or hesitation, the tribesmen pointed directly to the image of a pterosaur. They stated, with absolute certainty, that this was the Kongamato. This single interaction sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Pterosaurs were supposed to have gone extinct 66 million years ago during a global cataclysm. The idea that a breeding population of prehistoric flying reptiles had survived in the isolated swamps of Central Africa was considered completely impossible. But there was a problem with dismissing it as a simple myth. If the creature was just a ghost story meant to scare children, why were people showing up with horrific physical injuries? The truly unsettling part comes later, when the creature began leaving a trail of blood. Just 2 years after Mellon's groundbreaking book, an English press correspondent named J. Ward Price was traveling through the British colonies in Africa. He was accompanying the future King Edward VIII on a diplomatic tour. During his journey, Price crossed paths with a local man who had ventured deep into the dreaded Jiundu marshes. The man was in critical condition. Across his back was a massive, gaping wound, inflicted with brutal, tearing force. The bleeding survivor claimed he had been ambushed in the swamp by a massive bird with terrifying teeth in its beak. When Price showed the injured man pictures of prehistoric pterosaurs, the man was thrown into a state of absolute panic and tried to flee the area. Most people never hear what happened next. The encounters didn't stop in the 1920s. They only became more frequent and more credible. In 1956, a respected engineer named J.P.F. Brown was traveling in Zaire, near the vast expanses of Lake Bangweulu. While stopping his vehicle to get water from his canteen, he looked up and saw something impossible. 2 prehistoric-looking creatures were flying silently overhead. He estimated their leathery wingspans to be over 3 feet across. He specifically noted their long, thin tails and elongated, dog-like heads. A year later, in 1957, the terror escalated from distant sightings back to sudden violence. A man stumbled into a hospital located in the exact same region where the engineer had spotted the creatures. The patient was suffering from severe, penetrating injuries to his chest. He told the horrified doctors that a massive, aggressive bird had attacked him out in the Bangweulu swamps. Desperate to understand what kind of animal had caused such horrific trauma, the doctors gave the man a piece of paper and asked him to sketch his attacker. The drawing he produced chilled the medical staff to the bone. It was the unmistakable outline of a pterosaur. That should have been the end of the story. A forgotten relic of the dinosaur age, hiding in the last unexplored corners of the earth. However, the legend becomes much darker when you look at an encounter from a highly trained scientist. In 1932, the renowned biologist and cryptozoologist Ivan T. Sanderson was leading an expedition in the mountains of Cameroon. Sanderson was an expert observer, a man who understood the natural world better than almost anyone. He and his companion, Gerald Russell, were hunting hammer, headed fruit bats near a mountain stream at dusk. Suddenly, a massive black shape dropped from the sky, hurtling directly at Sanderson. To save his own life, Sanderson threw himself into the water, diving beneath the surface just in time to avoid the strike. When he emerged, gasping for air, the monstrous creature circled back for a second pass. Sanderson described it as an entity the size of an eagle, with huge, Dracula-like wings. But it was the face that haunted him. Its lower jaw hung open, revealing a semicircle of pointed white teeth, set wide apart. As it flew, its teeth chattered loudly, and its massive wings made a sharp hissing sound as they cut through the humid air. Shaken by the near-death experience, the biologist called it the Granddaddy of All Bats. His local guides were absolutely terrified. They called the monster the Olisio. Linguists believe this name comes from a fusion of indigenous words used to describe ceremonial dance masks representing demons. Could the African pterosaur actually be a massive, terrifyingly aggressive species of bat? Across the ocean, on the island of Java in Indonesia, locals speak of the ahul, a giant bat-like monster with a flat face and a 12-foot wingspan. The similarities between these global legends are undeniable. But there was a problem. The largest known bat in the world, the giant golden, crowned flying fox, has a wingspan of just over 5 feet. And more importantly, it is a peaceful herbivore that eats fruit. What Sanderson saw was a highly aggressive apex predator. But beyond the biology, there is a much bigger mystery. If the creature is a bat, or even a flying reptile, how do we explain its ability to stop rivers and capsize heavy wooden boats? And that is where the story takes a strange turn. To truly understand the Kongamato, we have to stop looking at it through the eyes of Western explorers and start listening to the people who actually live with it. The Konde tribe does not view this entity as a mere biological animal. Unlike polytheistic gods that have large families and complex mythologies, the Kongamato is entirely solitary. It is an elemental spiritual force, a vengeful guardian that watches over the sacred thresholds between the human world and the spirit world. According to the folklore, physical weapons are completely useless against it. If you fire a bullet or throw a spear at the beast, the projectile will either bounce harmlessly off its scaly hide, or the creature will simply swallow it in midair without taking any damage. It is believed to be completely immortal and invulnerable. So how do the locals survive in its territory? They rely on a highly specific ancient ritual. They carry a magical charm known as the Muchiwa Kongamato. This is not a simple lucky talisman. It is a complex chemical and spiritual defense system. To create it, the tribesmen grind the roots of the sacred Mulendi tree into a fine powder, mixing it with river water to form a thick paste. This paste is carefully carried in a customized cup made of tree bark. When a traveler reaches a dangerous river crossing, they do not rely on speed or stealth to survive. Instead, they take a bundle of thin bark strips from the same Mulendi tree, dip them into the paste, and actively sprinkle the mixture across the surface of the water. This ritual is the only thing that breaks the creature's magic, preventing the deadly floods and forcing the beast to retreat. But what if the magic is actually a practical defense against something living deep in the mud? What happened next was even stranger, because modern researchers realized the original explorers might have made a massive mistake. Most people don't realize how easily the truth can be distorted when two wildly different cultures try to communicate. When Frank Mellon showed the African tribesmen pictures of dinosaurs, he was leading the witness. He presented an image of a monster, and the locals agreed it looked like their monster. But a prominent cryptozoology researcher named Dale Drinnen proposed a completely different explanation. Drinnen pointed out a glaring contradiction in the legend. The creature's name literally means overturner of boats. A delicate flying reptile with hollow bones would shatter its own skeleton if it tried to ram a heavy wooden canoe. Drinnen hypothesized that the Kongamato was never a flying creature. It was a massive, highly aggressive freshwater stingray, specifically a rare species known as Phontetragon eucpam, which lives in the rivers of West and Central Africa. This incredibly heavy ray can grow up to 4 feet wide and 10 feet long. Its back is covered in sharp, thorny scales, and its skin is a dark reddish-brown. Imagine the terrifying scenario. A fisherman is paddling his canoe through the murky, silent swamp at dusk. Suddenly, a 100-pound armored disc erupts from the water. Stingrays are known to breach, launching themselves into the air with their massive pectoral fins flapping wildly like leathery, featherless wings. The sheer weight of the animal crashing back down onto the canoe would easily capsize it. Furthermore, this specific ray defends itself by violently whipping its tail, which is covered in jagged serrated thorns. This perfectly explains the gaping, horrific wounds on the backs and chests of the survivors. In the chaos of a sudden attack, a massive, brown, winged shape launching out of the river and inflicting deep lacerations would easily be interpreted as a prehistoric demon. The physical evidence aligns perfectly with the giant stingray, but there was a problem. The stingray theory does not explain everything. It does not explain the creatures seen gliding high in the sky by engineers and pilots. And it certainly doesn't explain the horrifying behavior reported in the late 1990s. Some skeptics argue that the flying sightings are simply misidentifications of the terrifying shoebill stork. The shoebill is a massive, prehistoric-looking bird that stands 5 feet tall. It has a massive, heavy beak with a sharp hook on the end, capable of decapitating small crocodiles. Its slate, gray feathers can look like dark leather in the twilight, and it possesses a small tuft of feathers on the back of its head that perfectly resembles the bony crest of a pteranodon. But the locals know what a stork is, and a stork does not commit the atrocities attributed to the Kongamato in recent years. In 1998, a Kenyan student named Steve Ramandi Menya came forward with chilling new details about the creature's modern activities. He claimed that the beast was still very real, and still a terrifying presence for the rural communities of Kenya. However, the legend becomes much darker when you look at its diet. According to these modern reports, the creature is no longer just hunting in the rivers. It has developed a taste for human remains. Under the cover of darkness, the beast allegedly swoops down into village graveyards. It uses its massive claws to dig into the earth, unearthing shallow graves that haven't been buried deep enough. It then feeds on the decomposing flesh of the dead. With this terrifying behavior mirrors another famous cryptid, the glowing ropen of Papua New Guinea, which is also said to be a grave, robbing pterosaur. The idea that this creature is actively hunting the dead adds a macabre layer to the mystery. It is no longer just a territorial animal defending its river. It is a scavenger of human souls, reinforcing the ancient belief that it consumes the identity of its victims. The stories became so prominent that in 2010, an American expedition group called Genesis Park traveled deep into the Zambian swamps. Armed with thermal cameras and night vision gear, they conducted all-night vigils, desperate to capture evidence of the flying dinosaur. They interviewed local fishermen who confirmed the creature's existence, but the expedition ultimately returned without definitive proof. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The legendary zoologist Bernard Heuvelmans, widely known as the father of cryptozoology, dedicated a massive section of his 1955 book, On the Track of Unknown Animals, to this very creature. He titled the chapter Kongamato, The Last Flying Dragon. Heuvelmans warned the scientific community against arrogance. He pointed out that massive animals like the mountain gorilla, the giant panda, and the okapi were all dismissed as ridiculous native myths by Western scientists, right up until the exact moment they were proven real. Perhaps the Kongamato is simply waiting for its moment of discovery. But whether it is a surviving Rhamphorhynchus, a mutated giant bat, an aggressive stingray, or a massive stork, the creature serves a much higher purpose. The truly unsettling part is what the Kongamato represents today. To the local tribes, its terrifying screech in the night is a dark omen of impending disaster, predicting floods, disease, and death. But modern scholars see it as a profound ecological warning. The swamps and wetlands of Africa are being systematically destroyed by deforestation, pollution, and human greed. The Kongamato is the ultimate guardian of these sacred thresholds. It is the embodiment of nature's wrath, a violent enforcer that punishes those who exploit the environment. By consuming the faces and fingers of its victims, it erases the humanity of those who refuse to respect the wild. The legend survives because the fear survives. Deep in the Jiundu Swamps, where the water is thick and the shadows are long, the locals still carry the roots of the Mulendi tree. because they know that some myths are entirely real. And they know that the breaker of boats is always listening for the sound of a paddle in the dark.